The swarm is very clever. It will create the theater. And that's what we're seeing right now with Israel. So when you look at Israel, using that systems approach, Kim, it gives you a prescience to see things, not because you're super smart, it's because there are certain principles that are there. So right now, if you look at what's going on with Israel, it's the same phenomenon. And to understand that, we have to understand the interlinkages of history. So if you go back to 2008, Barack Obama was brought in as a candidate of the swarm, right? Overnight, the Pritzkers, I think one of the big families in Chicago, funded him. And this one-term senator is thrust upon people because people were pretty upset at that point with the Bushes. So they needed hope. So Obama is created and he's thrust upon people. In fact, 57% of people voted for Trump, voted for Obama. People need to understand that. So he was able to, quote unquote, appeal to the broad working class who, instead of breaking and building a bottoms-up movement, they needed to put another false idol. And that's really the goal. They do not want people to build a bottoms-up movement. And once we understand that, you'll see why they create these characters. So what does Obama do? At the height of his presidency in 2008, the Zionists who control the financial systems, the Zionists and their cohorts, the swarm, were involved in printing money, realized that they had been making all these derivative products, these loans, which were going to fail and fall. And they had a major failure in 2008. And all the banks failed because they were giving out crazy types of products. That was created by the collusion of the Federal Reserve, the banks, and the treasuries. All of them were involved. They all rotate between them. When that crash took place, what did Obama do, the man of the people? He printed $8 trillion and bailed them all out. This is critical to understand. $8.1 trillion was what Obama printed. And that money dispersed, and they called it quantitative easing. Swarm is very clever, with very clever words. That money went really to boost up the stock market and went to the swarm. They saved the swarm. And between 2008 and 2016, that money was being dispersed, right? By 2016, in my view, they knew another economic crash was coming because the United States economy was being built on fumes, not really bottoms-up entrepreneurs and real innovation. Just look at it. So they needed, and people had it with Obama, they needed a new fake idol. And that was the purpose of Trump. Trump was created, he was manufactured. If you look at his balance sheet, I have somebody I know who analyzed his balance sheet, okay? He had $1 billion in assets and $2 billion in debt. And this guy told him, look, Donald, you're a billionaire, you're a negative billionaire, right? He was a reality show billionaire. So they found this guy, gave him all the talking points, drain the swamp, lock her up. I'm sure they did amazing focus group analysis on this, but particularly the white working class would want to hear. He was brought in, and what did he do? There was an economic crash that was predicted to come. So in order not to have that economic crash come out, and in a true market capitalism model that should have come out, and we should have gotten rid of all the products that didn't work, right? Instead, they created the pandemic. The pandemic was a wonderful crisis that they created to hide the underpinnings of the fact that the entire financial system was running on fumes. And what did Trump do? In one term, he printed $8 trillion. Where did that money go? It went to 600 billionaires who increased their wealth by $2.3 trillion. Elon Musk being among one of them, who's like this with government. He's a front man for government. And the stock market, which was going like this, did a nice V turn, if you remember. But still, the economy is running on fumes. And in my thesis, if you follow this all the way through this October, there should be a massive crash. Anyone who looks at this knows that the stock market is at ridiculous high levels that it never should be. You can look at certain stocks. The whole thing, the swarm is running this on fumes, on the backs of working people in this country. So in my theory, they needed another crisis. And it was a meeting of two crises. In Israel itself, if you go back prior to October 7th and the 12 months before that, there's been a massive civil war brewing in Israel. Against who? Against Netanyahu. Israeli Jews and many different coalitions know this guy's corrupt. He was convicted, right? He has multiple indictments. And so there's been this bottoms-up movement brewing in Israel. 2 weeks before October 7th, there were nearly 100,000 people who protested against him because he was trying to manipulate the judiciary. And none of this is mainstream media. Right. From April to October, he had sent twice to invade the main mosque there. So he wanted to incite something. It's your typical corrupt leader who's got internal problems and they want to point it to someone else and start a war. And that's what Netanyahu did. And by the way, if you look at the shekel price, people should just map it from January 2022 to today. It's been precipitously coming down, which means the Israeli elites have been selling off the shekel and more than likely moving to treasuries. So you have many Israeli companies have been moving out. So Israel is in disaster economically. Netanyahu's entire existence was threatened. So how wonderful, I'm not saying this happened in this way, a phone call is made to Hamas, which by the way, Israel created, okay? Yossi Cohen, the Mossad chief 2 years before that, had been with Qatar saying, please fund Hamas more. So overnight, you see these gliders coming over, evading supposedly the most amazing surveillance that Israel has, AI watching every microsecond, comes in and you have this crisis. Now it helps the US swarm and the Israeli swarm. Both are very connected, a la Zionism, because the United States economy is running on fumes. Now you have the third opportunity to do quantitative easing and print more money. And that's what this is about. You have to follow the money. And from a systems perspective, all fixed. fits beautifully because the swarm protects itself. And Zionism is very key to this because the Zionist concept has been very effectively used to manipulate Jews. And we should talk more about that, the working class Jews versus the bourgeois Jews, going all the way back to World War II. People need to understand Zionism is racism, is a political ideology. Zionists collaborated with the Nazis in the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt, for example, to disarm the Jews who actually wanted to fight. Zionism and Nazism have always gone together like this. And in the United States, the Zionists have been very effective at manipulating the quote-unquote Christian evangelical Zionists. So the broad mass among America, there's this big support for quote-unquote Israel, and that really comes from the evangelicals. The evangelical Christians, who many of them are very connected to Mossad in Israel, if you do a little bit of research, and to, in fact, write to Bibi Netanyahu. So the manipulation that's gone on is quite extraordinary. And Mike Johnson, who's a recent speaker, the second in line to be president, completely reflects that. Here's a hardcore, quote-unquote Christian. I put that in double quotes because I don't think Christ supports Zionism. And he is, first thing he does is when he gets elected, he does a proclamation, we must support Israel. So it says it pretty much right there. So this is, we need to look at this in the context of finance and money supply. The money supply, as Milton Friedman says, when it contracts more than 2 quarters, there's typically going to be a bear market. And they're trying to stave off a bear market. That's what this is all about. And war is a wonderful way. You have a little dip and then you print money and you come out of it. So that's what this whole setup is. And all of this is being done at the expense of Jewish people and the Palestinian people. And when I say the Jewish people, the non-Zionists, because frankly, the Zionists don't give a damn about Jews, nor do they give a damn about Palestinians. And all of this feeds British and U.S. imperialism. It was Britain that allowed Zionism to go and occupy this land because they wanted that strategic outpost. They wanted to create a strata of people who would be their frontmen to basically seize that location and create a perpetual war. And so when Booby Kennedy says he wants to support that
aircraft carrier in the Middle East,
aircraft carrier, he's telling you boldly, at least finally people should see who he is. On the medical freedom movement, he supported Hillary Clinton. He wanted people coming to his home to be vaccinated. So when you put it all together, what I love about this issue about Zionism, Kim, it exposes who these people are. Tulsi Gabbard has to reveal that she is a part of the swarm. Bernie Sanders has to reveal he's part of the swarm. It is that defining issue. And then you're finding these other people who you may have disagreed on other things. When it comes to Zionism, we can actually unite on that. So that's what I see the opportunity here.
It certainly is another one of those topics that is reorganizing alliances. There's no doubt about that. People that I agreed with very much so during the pandemic or about the endless wars, suddenly when it comes to this one issue, it's just all in for Israel, all in for sending, even if it means sending American troops to battle it out over there, this new war on terror 2.0. Tulsi Gabbard's all in on this. She's very much like radical Islam is the number one thing we must battle. And it's really, because how successful have we been at that over the last 20? When have we ever had a single success on that? All we've done is make it more radical, right? Create ISIS or because people are going to be angry when you kill their kids. That's what's going to happen. And they're going to want to liberate their people, like revenge, and a lot of times very brutally. I think that is something that if you were to kill my kid, and I get it, and I get that's why Israel now is saying they came after us and our 1,300 people, and so now we're just gonna. But I agree with you that because I'm seeing this movement in Israel as well, this uprising against Netanyahu, that a lot of them are saying there's been enough blood, there's been enough war, our people were killed, their people were killed, we're done with this, like we don't need any more. But Netanyahu, who's trying to save his own skin, and he's very intertwined in the U.S. political system, and he's very close with Jared Kushner and Trump and all these various different people, and he's certainly absolutely trying to save his skin. So a lot of people, I think, even in Israel, I think you're right that there's this brewing civil war potentially. I even watched a video the other day of Netanyahu when he showed up at a military base in Israel. Some of the Israeli soldiers were yelling at him, like saying, "You did this to us. This is your fault." They were angry. So you've got military guys pointing the finger at Netanyahu saying, this is you. You did this to us. Yeah, I think that they're on edge.
Well, I think the Zionism issue, it gives us an opportunity to finally have a real discussion about this at a very deep level. And that's what I've been attempting to do. And we've been educating people, what is Zionism? Zionism is racism in the service of imperialism.
Well, let's unpack that so that people understand, because a lot of people don't understand. They equate, because the narrative right now is that if you say Israel or if you say Zionism, you're really meaning Jews, which is not the same thing at all. Zionism is a movement.
So in this educational process, Kim, when you go back and look at this, if you look at maps going all the way to 1600s, it clearly says Palestine. Okay. Just as a side note, and this is not the central note, imagine you're living in Vermont and you've lived there for 300 years. The Vikings, who actually did come there, say, hey, we have this place. We were there 4,000 years ago. That's our land. It means ludicrous. Okay. You dug up some 4,000-year-old reps. So that's where that's coming from. But so that's one just points to people how stupid this is, how ludicrous it is, because you have to look at the current context that was taking place. The current context of the time, if we go to the mid 1800s, and by the way, I've spent time in Israel about 6 weeks, and I have a lot of good Jewish friends, right? Where many of them are anti-Zionist, by the way.
Yeah.
So when I was in the 80s, when I was 17, 18 years old, I really started exploring this. And so for me, it was very personal because I grew up in India where there was a caste system, and the Hinduism was never originally based on the caste system. Then you created this thing called the Brahmin caste system, which is very much like Zionism. And that's where Tulsi Gabbard is getting this stuff from, because she's quote unquote a Hindu. And so the Brahmanical caste system took elements of Hinduism, and then they packaged it up to justify the fact that one group of people were chosen over the others. Very fundamentally similar, the Brahmin caste system to Zionism. So when I came to the United States, I grew up in Patterson, which is a very poor African-American public school system, then Clifton. Parsippany had, very interestingly, Jews, but they were working class Jews. My sixth grade teacher had been in the Navy. He ran a small deli, right? But when I moved to Livingston, New Jersey, by the way, where Jared Kushner and Ivanka maybe still used to live, Chris Christie was a catcher of our baseball team I used to pitch. I noticed a big difference. Me and my sister were the only two dark-skinned Indians among this massive group of around 4,000 Jewish kids. And I remember around 9th or 10th grade, the parents would send their kids to Israel. And these very nice friends of mine would come back rabid Zionists, wanting to kill every Arab. It was quite amazing to watch this transformation. But there was always in the ether the concept of the chosen people. Now, Livingston was a much wealthier school system than Parsippany or Clifton. So the reason I want to unpack this is that there is a class issue here. There is very wealthy Jews, and there are the working class Jews. So now if we go back to the 1800s, there were Jewish pogroms taking place by the quote-unquote Cossacks. So that's a reality. What one needs to understand is that at that time, there were very bourgeois Jews who would collaborate with the lords and the kings to be their bankers and usurers, etc. But there were also the working class Jews. And these bourgeois Jews needed to keep their working class Jews in alignment with them. So even back then, they would do division among the Jews and the Christians, right? And say, hey, you're being treated in anti-Semitic ways. But what one needs to understand is that even back then, the bourgeois Jews always collaborated, even with the Cossacks, against their own people. And people should go do some history on this. Yeah. But anyway, Theodor Herzl, Herzl, he comes out in the middle of all of this in the 1800s. And there were two trends at that time among Jewish people. One trend was, hey, we're everyday people. We have the right to fight back for our progressive nationalist rights. The ethnic nationalism was what Herzl represented. And he really wanted to actually divide Jews. He wasn't into Jews fighting against their oppression, very much like Marcus Garvey did in the United States. In the Black movement, Marcus Garvey said, oh, we're being mistreated here. Let's go back to Africa. It was an ethnic nationalism. Let's go back to our old homeland, forgetting that the African kings themselves were slave owners, right? So Herzl came from that trend of the bourgeois Jews. He manufactured a philosophy called Zionism, which was based on racism. And his collaborators were other racists who funded him. Cecil Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes, Rhodes. Rhodes was the founder of Rhodesia, very closely linked with apartheid South Africa, and for example, exploiting the hell out of Black people all over South Africa. He was the one who founded the Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford. He was very much into starting World War I, demonizing the Germans. Horrible human being. But that's where Herzl got his funding, from one of the most racist people on the planet. At the Sixth Zionist Conference, the goal was we were going to make Uganda be our homeland. Okay? And then the British in the Balfour Declaration said, no, we're going to move you over here. Knowing that Arabs were there, 97% Arabs, right, in Palestine, Britain had been looking for many years to seize that very strategic location. And this was remember, British model was always divide and rule. You go into a place, geographically divide people, cause a lot of ruckus, and then you can start striking deals. They did it all over Africa, India, etc. So they collaborated with Herzl, brought European Jews. You just need to understand, these people weren't dark-skinned Arabs. They were white Jews from Europe who'd been there for 300 years. And these people essentially come in, occupy Palestine. It was an invasion. There were Arabs who were Jews. There were Arabs who were Christians, Arabs who were Muslims there. And a number of Arabs who were Jews start converting to Islam based on the treatment they suffered from these European Jews coming, quote-unquote Zionists. And so that's the origin of the Zionist movement. But it was done, when I say Zionism is racism in the service of imperialism, this was British and U.S. imperialism, who want their aircraft carrier in the Middle East, who want that strategic location. So they did this divide and rule policy, and Herzl was a perfect character to support them in this process. And time, one needs to understand that this is a very critical thing to understand. Times, the Zionists, who were the bourgeois Jews, collaborated with Hitler against working class Jews, many of them who were trade union leaders, organizing these bottoms-up movements to overthrow Hitler. They collabed in the famous Ghetto Revolt. Jews, Zionists, Zionists were the police force in those ghettos. And it was those people, in fact, led people to the gas chambers. It was those people who collaborated with Nazis, and there were Jews who were fighting Hitler with Molotov cocktail sticks and stones, and they exposed these people, they disarmed them. So everyone needs to understand there's Zionism, there's Judaism, right? And they're two different phenomena.
The vast majority of the people of Israel and the people of Palestine just want a better life. They just want to work and have a good life for their children, for themselves, have homes, have opportunities. That's all they want. And they could absolutely do it together. I have no doubt in me, after meeting the Palestinian people, after being around in Israel and seeing the average Israelis, they could absolutely live together and have a prosperous, wonderful life, just like we've been able to do here in the United States. You and I, as people who are not white, we do believe that we can make it, we can work in this country, that we have opportunities. We don't have to be separated and segregated from one another. We don't need to live like that. And I believe that the swarm, like you're saying, the swarm of on all sides is just operating together for their own self-interest. You think Hamas wants to end this if these guys are making billions of dollars off of this conflict? You think these Israeli Likud party people want to stop this when it's self-preservation, they're making money and they're in the elite and they're the swarm? Nobody wants to end it, but the people do. And you're right, we have to rise up, we have to get the message out, and we have to say the people, this is for the people, this is what the people want. We want to end this division and this hatred and this rhetoric that's meant to divide us and keep us separated, just to keep them going, keep the swarm going. That's all we're doing. And you have really wonderfully pointed that out. So I really definitely recommend everybody watch the swarm video. Again, that is down below. Also, you have I noticed at the end of the swarm video, you mentioned you have an institute that people can learn from.
Yeah, what I did, Kim, when I got back from my Fulbright work, I realized one of the most important things that we can do to help everyone in the world is to learn the science of systems. I used to teach it at MIT to elites. The elites use the science of systems. They understand the dynamics of control. But that same knowledge, curriculum, can be used for us for our own liberation. So I put this curriculum together, and I realized that, like fire being brought to the masses, like Prometheus did, we need to bring this knowledge to the masses. So I created it, put it into a course, and people can go to truefreedomhealth.com and people can learn it. And if you're an adult and you learn it, you can then give it away to as many children as you want between 13 to 18. Okay. So it is the science of systems, in my view, that is going to be the liberating force. It gives people the tools to understand this so they don't get into the left or right camp. And that, to me, it's about raising human consciousness. We're at an extraordinary time where there's massive darkness taking place. It's an opportunity for people to raise consciousness. And if enough of us do that, consciousness, raising of consciousness is an energy. It spreads to others. So that's the opportunity that we have.
So tell us how your campaign is going.
Yeah, so it's going really well, Kim. As you can see, if you look broadly across, when we're not shadow banned on social media, more and more people, you can look at it every day, say, hey, I'm going to vote for Dr. Shiva. I'm going to vote for Dr. Shiva. I'm going to vote for Dr. Shiva. Hey, this guy is the one who has consistently spoken the truth. Every Thursdays, we do a town hall. So for example, this evening, we do a town hall. We get those numbers keep growing. But a lot of what we're doing, Kim, is to get people on the ground. As I shared last time, when people go to our website, Shiva for President, they download bumper stickers, but we actually have a very powerful flyer. It's old school, Kim, what I used to do when I was a student activist, right? A flyer, one-page flyer. The left side of the flyer really shares with people this curve. It's called the lifespan curve. And we're the first ones who started really sharing that about the fact that your children's lifespan will be shorter than yours. And that it's not because of the vaccine. It's the issue of systemic policies that go back all the way to the 1960s, which really started showing up in the 1980s. And it's policies. And in that flyer, it says this is the policies of the swarm. And voting for the lesser of two evils, or even for quote unquote fake independence like Booby Kennedy, are not going to do it. You need a systems overhaul. And then we describe in that flyer what's a swarm, right? Where they can take their iPhone and click and go watch the swarm video. And on the right side of the flyer, because we have very little real estate, we explain to people who are campaigning how you can get educated to take a systems understanding and come to our town hall. So our goal is to get around 50 million of these flyers on the ground. So we, in our movement, have close to about 500,000 people globally. So we've been doing a lot of hard work. Now, in every state, we have to get on the ballot, which means you have to have an organization structure. Typically, only the Republicans and Democrats have that. Fortunately, we have that infrastructure. We have leaders in every state. So it's a pretty large operation we're running. I love building organizations. I've done it as an entrepreneur. You have to figure out how to motivate people. You have to build sort of a meritocracy model. So it's all these skills that I learned. So it's a lot of fun. But most importantly, we're finding these amazing people who themselves are rising to the occasion so one person doesn't have to do it. And so the organizational infrastructure piece is really important in what's happening all over the country. The other piece is on the issue, we went into some detail on the issue of that why it's unconstitutional not to allow an naturalized citizens to become president. I'm the first one who also filed a declaratory relief lawsuit against Merrick Garland. And I can, if you want, I can share that, but it's a cover of that. But I'll send it to you guys later to put in. But that lawsuit basically says, hey, look, for 3 reasons, not only can I run and be president, A, I can run because of the First Amendment, 2, because of the 2011 opinion of the Federal Election Commission, which clearly said a naturalized citizen can run, but you just can't get federal matching funds, which I'm not interested in anyway. But more importantly, the 14th and 5th Amendment reciprocate each other, which again have never been asserted. The first article said that only men can be president. The 19th Amendment allows women to be president. Similarly, the argument is the 14th Amendment does. And most legal scholars agree with this. It's just no one has asserted it, actually said, hey, I'm running for president and I'm going to file a declaratory relief lawsuit. That's what we're doing.
Okay, great. I want to talk about the swarm. You just have such an interesting way of putting this out there. When a lot of us talk about, and we hear this all throughout social media, and many people are very concerned about this, the powers that be who are controlling things.
And to each other. The swarm, be it the Kennedys, be it the Trumps, be it the Bernie Sanders, they're not going to help you. They're all Zionists. They're part of this. Don't look to them. And quick pitch, Kim, people can go to shiva4president.com. We have a bumper sticker there we recommend people to get. My belief is the future is offline. Everything's controlled online. So I recommend people go there. There's a flyer we have on a download. Download it. You can educate people who is a swarm, what they're doing to your health and your children's health. The future is going offline. And if you really want to get educated, go to Truth for Them Health and start understanding how systems work. But that's the way out. It's education. Get educated or be enslaved. That's my slogan here. And that's it's a long game in that sense, but it's the ultimate game.
Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, this has been a wonderful conversation once again. Thank you so much for being here. And I do have all those links down below so anybody can find everything really easily, but wonderful, enlightening conversation. I thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kim. Great discussion. Very intelligent. I'm glad we had this conversation.